Hey guys, so it's me, Nicolette, and today I want to talk about property rental business or having an investment property which you are renting out, and how do you foolproof yourself from delinquent tenants. And I call them delinquent tenants because I really feel like they're bad people. Anybody that is a tenant that intentionally moves into your apartment with the idea or the intention of not paying you for some months really is a bad person. Yes, we can definitely feel sorry for and have empathy for anybody who is befallen by a financial crisis and all of a sudden they cannot pay. But there are people that purposely go into properties that they know they cannot afford because psychologically they cannot let go of the idea that they actually can no longer afford certain places. And then because they also know the law, which is generally the PI Act, they will use that against you as the landlord to stay in your place without paying rent. You are paying utilities, you are paying levies, and it just goes downhill from there because they know that the law at some point to some level always tips towards them, right? Because the South African law is very empathetic to people, housing issues in general. So the law will be done in such a way, or is done in such a way, that it will feel like when you are the landlord that it's protecting the tenant more than it's protecting your rights as the landlord. But remember that none of my videos constitute as financial advice. If you are looking for financial advice, please speak to somebody who is certified and registered with the FSCA. So let me give you a story about how my last difficult tenant, how I actually got them. And that will be a clear indicator of the number one rule when you are getting tenants. So I had just lost a tenant. I just bought a property. I had not lost the tenant yet. I had just bought a property in one of the estates in Douglasdale. And so what people do is that when there isn't exactly a for rent board at your apartment, they will speak to the guards and they will ask the guards, is there any apartment here that is vacant, right? So this lady was told that I had just bought a property, the place is standing vacant, and I'm probably going to need a tenant, right? Right, okay, not a problem. So I'm now looking for a tenant. I'm in a desperate situation because I want to put a tenant in as quickly as possible. This girl apparently is being kicked out of her apartment in the same estate because the owners of that specific place where she's staying want to sell, right? And they don't want to sell with a tenant in place. So we kind of by fate or by cause that she created meet up inside the estate while I'm coming from my unit. So she bumps into me and she says, hi, I heard that you've got a place that is opened up. I've been living in this estate for so long. I think she told me she's been living there for like 12 years. And unfortunately, her landlords didn't give her enough notice and she's got to move out because they are selling to a new person and she desperately needs a place to stay. So in my excitement to get this new tenant, she's been living in the state for 14 years. Why not? She's got a son. She says, I've got a son. I'm responsible. I pay my rent every single month. And I'm like, okay, this sounds like a great idea. So I'm like, you know what? Let me actually, instead of using a rental agency, because that's going to cost me like 1 month's rent to place this person, all I need to do is just go to a CNA and buy myself a lease or Google a lease or take my old leases when I was renting and just adapt those, edit them, and put in her name. Big mistake. Probably one of the biggest mistakes that I actually made 2 years ago, right? Okay, sharp, not a problem. So we finally get a lease drafted. We agree on how much it's going to pay, how much the deposit is going to be. And this girl moves in. She moved in swiftly. She didn't even have issues because obviously she's already in the system at the estate. She doesn't need a lot of things to be changed, right? She moves in. I hand over the key. We do an inspection when she moves in. Not a problem. Guys. This woman became a nightmare for me. And it was such a bad nightmare because she had a young child. It was very difficult to just evict her. So you couldn't just evict her. And what she would do is that when she sees that you are close to the eviction, to the end of the eviction process, she would pay in some money. And the law, according to South African law, if they pay in the money and you don't return it, it's almost like you're restarting the entire process. So she kind of knew the law. There were a couple of times when she said to me straight up that you can't kick me out because I've got nowhere to go. Where do you want me to go? So she would use words that would be in the PI Act to get at me. And you know what? Eventually, I got her out. I got her out by begging her to basically leave. I had to beg her to basically leave my house because she had not been paying rent. So how do you spot these kind of people? Number one, do not rent out to somebody who's desperate. I can tell you this. In actual fact, this is the second time I got screwed by somebody who was desperate to move in. The first time I moved some people in, they moved in like I had said that the house was available from April. They wanted to move in early in March because yada yada, they were being kicked out. And you know, half of the time you sometimes have to ask yourself why a person is actually being kicked out of their place. And it's worth picking up the phone and calling the previous landlord to get a better understanding of what actually is the situation here. So a lot of people will say, yeah, your biggest mistake was trying to manage these apartments yourself. I don't think so. I don't think it's such a bad thing to manage your own apartments. Why? Because you learn a lot. It's a crash course literally in rental business as quick as possible, so that when you do put in other people that are going to be managing these things for you, they too do not scam you. Because let me tell you, I've also been scammed by a real estate agency, right? So the first thing that I would say is do not move in tenants that are very desperate. Gauge their desperate level or their desperation level. Also manage emotionally, have emotional intelligence to manage your own desperation levels. With my third apartment, I literally sat for 6 months with no tenant because I was like, I'm not going to rush this, because when I rush it, that's when I get into trouble. So my apartment sat for 6 months straight up. I rejected, I think, at least 14 prospective tenants because I was like, no, I don't like them. I don't like their desperation. I don't like the fact that they've got stories of why they want to move in. So, I know that may sound as horrible as possible, but at the end of the day, I'm running a business, guys. And I don't want my properties to now become financial liabilities for me, where I'm feeling the pressure because I'm not breaking even, or I'm not working towards breaking even with my properties, because I did put in money to be able to buy these things, right? And you've got to realize that property investment, especially if you're doing rental income, is a business, and you've got to treat it that way. So, as I said, the first thing is do not move in a desperate tenant, because you're not going to get anything, especially if you have not done the background checks. And the background checks do include picking up the phone and speaking to the previous landlord or an agency who was renting out the place to them. The last apartment that I had to put a tenant in, I got a real estate agency to help me out. And they kept giving me people that I just didn't have a good feel about them. I couldn't specifically spot certain things, but I could feel that there was something, man, about these tenants that was off for me. The one thing I could really remember was that he had moved so many times in less than 3 years. And I was like, why does he move so many times? And I couldn't get a straight answer, you know? So that for me was a little bit problematic, that you've moved so many times. Why are you not a sustainable tenant, right? The other thing about him is that he apparently had more than 2 accounts. And yes, it's normal for people to have 2 accounts, but if you want to show me that you can pay rent, would it not make sense to show me the bank account where you actually pay your rent, where you're living now from, so that I can believe that you can actually afford the rent? It makes no sense for you to try and show me a bank statement that looks spotless and doesn't have a lot of deductions, yet you are not showing me how you're going to be able to pay rent, and all your money is getting finished. Like, he was earning a certain amount of money, and all of it was getting finished, but none of those deductions were going to rent. And I was like, nah, something is not right here. I'm getting scammed, right? So gut feeling is so important. But also, I think psychologically, don't rent out to people. I mean, I'm young, right? So I have a very bit of a problem, because I end up having to rent out to people that are far older than me. And when they meet me, immediately you can see they've got that thing about, you know, having a younger landlord. So what I try to do now is to rent to people who are maybe closest to my age. I don't like renting out to very old people, even though people are saying they are very sustainable. The reality is that I'm going to have psychological barriers and psychological restrictions to be able to speak to these people. So I don't want to rent out to those people. For me, it goes with age, it goes with gender. I know that I don't like renting out to men, primarily because I'm a woman, and I don't want to psychologically feel like I'm putting myself in a situation where I'm going to struggle when it's time for me to tell you, you're not paying your rent, you got to pay your rent. The other thing that I love renting out to mothers because I feel that they're very responsible, they're very sustainable. Look, I had a bad experience with a mom, but currently I'm just like, you know what, maybe it's because I didn't do a TPN check. That's the other thing that you've got to do. You've got to do those TPN checks, affordability. Those TPN check reports also have probability of defaulting on paying the rent, and it will give you a scoring of this person. So a TPN check is almost very similar to your credit report. It literally checks your tenant as history in terms of their finances and all those things. So do a TPN check. I think the other thing that that's the best way you can foolproof yourself is by making sure that from the beginning, from the onset, you are getting a good tenant, right? The other thing I've asked if I use a real estate agency to do is I've asked them now to double up on the deposit. I won't actually require it for you to pay it, but I want to see if you are willing to pay the double deposit. For me, it's a good sign, and I know it might be flawed. It's a good sign to know that this person is not about a money issue. They probably can afford this place, and they will probably pay their rent. The other thing that I do is I really do try and create a very solid relationship between myself and my tenants. So when you move in, I want to be there. I'll bring you some flowers. For those tenants that I haven't bought flowers, I'm sorry. But I will go to arm's length to do things for you. If you need something done quickly, I will get it done. Because I just feel like you've got to try your best to make this person comfortable. Tenants at the end of the day are part of your business and they're part of the growth of your business. And having a sustainable tenant is very, very important. But I think if you are going to be running a rental business, the other thing you need to do is to equip yourself with the law. You've got to understand the Housing and Rental Tribunal Act. You've got to understand PI Act. You've got to understand eviction processes, what you are allowed and what you are not allowed to do. You've got to understand how to treat your tenants, what you can and cannot do, what you can and cannot say. So I've got this thing that I used to do, which I now found out that it's wrong, right? I've got this thing of when I visit one tenant, I think it's okay to visit the others without giving them prior notice because my properties are all in one place. And that is wrong. You can't just out of the blue arrive at the door because it's your house. No, you've leased it out to somebody, so you've got to be careful of those kind of things. So you've got to know and understand what the PI Act is, what it says, what the PI Act is and what it says, what the Housing and Rental Tribunal Act says, and what are the recourse processes if you do find yourself in trouble with one of your tenants or your tenant is giving you trouble. I think that is also important. But last but not least, being able to make sure that you read a proper lease is also very important, because remember that if the lease is actually unlawful, it becomes void. That is important for you to remember. If any part of the lease is actually unlawful, either that part of the entire lease gets thrown out, or the entire lease will get thrown out and will be seen or ruled unlawful lease. So you've got to look out for those things. And the last thing that catches a lot of people out is the fact that people don't keep up with the amendments, especially of the different acts. You've got to keep up with the amendments of the different acts, and you've got to know what is actually happening. Again, you are running a business. You've also got to understand the tax implications of running a business. So the thing that endangers your rental business the most, obviously, is a good tenant, somebody who's going to take care of your place, somebody who feels good about taking care of your place, but most importantly, also the legislation. You've got to know the legislation. And the thing is, a lot of people get away with a lot of things because tenants generally don't know the law, so they don't know what their rights are, most tenants. But one day you're going to meet your maker. You're going to meet somebody who knows the law, and you don't want to be caught offside.